I stopped to fix a stranger's car and found my first love behind the wheel. The day had started like any other, with the hum of the city fading behind him as he drove down a quiet, tree-lined street. His young child slept in the back seat, blanket half tangled around tiny fingers, the soft rise and fall of their chest, a comforting rhythm against the stress of his day. He was used to moments like this, solitary, ordinary, but today something unusual was waiting. His own car coughed and spluttered before giving one last shudder and rolling to a stop near the curb. He muttered under his breath, stepping out into the afternoon sunlight that filtered lazily through the branches above. The warmth on his skin felt almost ironic against the chill of frustration creeping up his spine. He popped the hood, squinting at the tangle of metal and wires, already mentally retracing every stop he'd made that morning. Then he noticed the luxury car beside him. Sleek, polished, with that unmistakable aura of effortless wealth. He heard the soft click of a door and a voice, calm, measured, with a lilt that somehow made his chest tighten. She was leaning against the car, arms folded loosely, watching him. And suddenly the world tilted sideways. The line of her jaw, the way her eyes caught the light, the subtle curve of her smile. It all hit him at once. His heart stuttered. She hadn't changed as much as he'd expected. Maybe more composed, more confident, but it was her. The girl he had walked home from school with, the one who had laughed at his terrible jokes and made him feel like he mattered. For a moment, his hands froze over the engine, grease and metal heavy in his fingers, grounding him in the present. The faint scent of her perfume, soft, floral, familiar, drifted through the air, mixing strangely with the tang of car oil. He swallowed hard, pretending to examine the engine, but his eyes kept darting to her face. "Need some help?" she asked, her voice gentle but tinged with curiosity. He cleared his throat, a small, almost sheepish smile forming. I can manage," he said, but there was a beat of hesitation he couldn't hide. He noticed how she leaned slightly forward, the subtle shift in posture that brought her just a little closer, as if gravity itself wanted to bridge the gap between past and present. The sun caught her hair, turning strands of brown into amber highlights. His memory raced back to teenage afternoons when they had chased fireflies and shared secrets under a setting sun. The nostalgia pressed against him, sweet and aching all at once, and he realized he hadn't expected this encounter, or the surge of emotions it brought. A child's soft murmur from the back seat snapped him back to reality. He glanced over his shoulder, then back at her, noting the tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation in her eyes. Recognition flashed there too, memories unspoken, long-buried feelings brushing the surface. He exhaled slowly, rolling up his sleeves. Today was just a car breakdown, but somehow, it already felt like the first chapter of something entirely unexpected. The car engine still hissed faintly as he crouched beside it, hands smeared with grease. She watched silently, leaning lightly against the door, her posture elegant yet relaxed. For a heartbeat, he wasn't sure if he should speak or stay quiet, letting the moment stretch between them like a fragile thread. "I didn't expect anyone to stop," she said finally, her voice calm. But there was a curiosity there, a softness that tugged at him. He looked up from the engine, meeting her gaze. Those eyes, the ones he'd memorized years ago, were the same, but now deeper, lined with experience and quiet strength. "Sometimes people just help," he replied, fumbling with a wrench as if it were a shield. He felt suddenly self-conscious, noticing how her presence made his movements clumsier, more aware of every gesture. She smiled, almost imperceptibly, and it struck him like a memory, sharp and warm. "You've changed," she said, tilting her head slightly, her hands tucked casually into the pockets of her tailored blazer. The words were simple, but there was weight to them. He blinked, caught off guard, and for a moment the years melted away. He remembered teenage afternoons, shared laughter, whispered secrets. The awkwardness of their youth returned, but now layered with adult restraint, the hesitations of two people who had grown apart yet never entirely forgotten. He laughed, a short, uneven sound, brushing a hand across his hair. I guess so. Life has a way of doing that. He caught himself watching her hands as she adjusted her stance. Slender fingers tracing the edge of her sleeve, the subtle way she leaned slightly forward to watch him work. The closeness made his chest tighten, a mix of nostalgia and something new, unspoken. You always were stubborn, she teased, her eyes glinting with familiarity. Even back then. And you always made me feel like I was in trouble, he countered, his voice softer now, carrying a hint of the comfort they once shared. The air between them was charged with recognition. Friendship, affection, and a silent question neither dared to voice. What if things had been different? A soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from the nearby park, mingling with the faint tang of motor oil. He noticed how her hair fell across her cheek, and how instinctively he wanted to tuck it back behind her ear. A gesture loaded with remembered intimacy. Their shoulders brushed as he leaned over the engine. A fleeting touch that made him acutely aware of her warmth, the quiet energy in the shared space. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head toward him, letting the contact linger for just a moment longer than expected. He glanced toward the back seat, where his child stirred, rubbing sleepy eyes. The sight grounded him in the present, but also highlighted the contrast. Life had moved forward for both of them, in ways they hadn't anticipated. Yet here they were, the past colliding with the present in a quiet, electric moment of recognition. "Do you want a coffee?" he asked impulsively, wiping his hands on a rag. The words were ordinary, but beneath them lay a tentative bridge, a chance to reconnect, to navigate the awkward tension that hovered between them. She smiled, that same subtle, knowing smile, and nodded. "I'd like that." And just like that, the first step toward rekindled connection was taken, not with grand gestures, but in quiet acknowledgement of what had once been, and what might still be. Coffee cups warmed their hands, the rich aroma mingling with the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered from the car. They sat across from each other at a small cafe table, the midday sun streaming through the window and catching the highlights in her hair. Outside, the city hummed along, but here, in this quiet bubble, time seemed to slow. "So life as a single dad," she said, voice gentle but tinged with curiosity. She studied him, her eyes attentive without being intrusive, the kind of gaze that made him feel seen in a way few people did. He chuckled, taking a sip of coffee. "It's chaotic, mostly, but it's worth it. There's this tiny person depending on me, who somehow makes all the exhaustion feel meaningful." He paused, watching the sunlight catch her eyes, the subtle way her brow furrowed as if trying to understand him fully. "You've always been good with people," she said softly, a note of admiration in her voice that made his chest tighten. "I remember. You had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered." He smiled, a little embarrassed. "Guess some things don't change. Except now, I'm negotiating bedtime and homework instead of science projects and lunch trades." She laughed, a sound that was both familiar and new, carrying warmth and resonance that tugged at memories long tucked away. She leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the table, and he noticed the small gestures. The way her fingers flexed when she spoke, the subtle tilt of her head when she laughed, that made him acutely aware of her presence. "What about you?" he asked, curiosity threading through his tone. "CEO now, right? That must be intense." She exhaled, a hint of vulnerability slipping through her polished demeanor. "It is. People expect a lot, and sometimes it feels like I'm constantly performing. But moments like this, simple ones, they remind me of what's real." Her eyes softened, and he caught the fleeting tension around her shoulders ease, just a little, as if talking to him allowed her to breathe. For a moment, they sat in quiet observation of each other, neither rushing, both absorbing the subtle comfort of shared presence. He noticed the way her gaze lingered a second longer than necessary on his hands, rough from work, the faint scar along his knuckle, and he felt the unspoken acknowledgement of the life he'd built. Messy, imperfect, but honest. His child stirred in the back seat later that afternoon, reminding him of the world outside this fragile bubble. Yet when he glanced at her, He realized she was no stranger to vulnerability either. The confidence she exuded masked layers of experience, challenge, and quiet loneliness. A few more shared anecdotes, small smiles, and fleeting touches. The brush of her hand against his as she reached for her coffee built a rhythm between them. The familiarity of their past intertwined with the curiosity of the present, forming a delicate bridge. By the time they left the cafe, the tension had shifted. It was no longer just awkward recognition. It was a budding connection rooted in mutual respect, nostalgia, and the tentative trust that comes from truly seeing someone, beyond roles, titles, and years apart. As they walked toward the cars, their steps fell into a comfortable alignment, each subtly attuned to the other, a silent acknowledgement that this encounter was just the beginning. The following week, small interactions began to stretch longer, each meeting carrying the weight of unspoken curiosity and lingering familiarity. She stopped by his neighborhood park one afternoon, ostensibly to discuss the final touches on her car, but it quickly became something more, a chance to linger, to reconnect beyond casual civility. He watched her as she crouched to greet his child, her fingers brushing the back of their hair, her smile tender and unforced. The child giggled, reaching for her hand, and she held it lightly, letting warmth radiate from her touch without forcing closeness. It was effortless, natural, a soft reminder of the ease they had once shared, now colored by years of life experience. "Your kid's got your stubborn streak," she said, laughing softly as she straightened, eyes crinkling at the corners. He noticed the way her hair fell across her face, catching the afternoon light, and an almost magnetic pull drew him to subtly adjust it behind her ear, careful not to overstep. The brief contact sparked something, an unspoken recognition that the past was alive, quietly threading into the present. They wandered toward a nearby bench, talking about mundane things at first, the neighborhood, the weather, but soon, the conversation deepened. She asked about his days as a single parent, genuinely curious. He spoke of the small victories and the challenges, the late-night worries, the quiet pride in tiny achievements, the fatigue that never quite dissipated. Each word was spoken with honesty, a vulnerability he rarely allowed in public, and she listened with undivided attention, leaning slightly closer, her shoulder brushing his as if by accident. In return, she shared pieces of her world beyond the polished veneer. The pressure of running a company, the isolation that sometimes came with leadership, the weight of expectations she carried silently. Her hands moved in soft gestures, emphasizing her words, the warmth of her presence tangible. He could see the tension in her shoulders ease when she spoke with him, as if this connection reminded her of simpler times, of trust earned in youth. There was a rhythm to their interaction, a give and take, a balance of listening and revealing, punctuated by small, meaningful touches. A hand resting momentarily on his arm to emphasize a point, a subtle brush of fingers as they passed a notebook back and forth, each contact carrying warmth without urgency. The quiet intimacy built slowly, like a tide lapping against the shore, steady and inevitable. A moment of laughter over a minor mishap, the child knocking over a cup, led to a pause, a shared glance that lingered too long to be casual. Their eyes met, and for the first time since the car breakdown, words weren't necessary. The acknowledgement hung in the air. They were both cautiously navigating feelings that had survived years of separation. As the sun began to dip lower, painting the park in golden light, he felt a rare sense of comfort. Not just in her presence, but in the unfolding connection, the quiet assurance that this was more than a fleeting encounter. For the first time in a long while, the walls around both of them softened, giving way to trust, warmth, and a tentative, unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, they could explore what had always lingered between them. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the quiet street as he finished tightening the last bolt on her car. The engine purred smoothly, and he stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag, but neither of them moved to leave. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the tang of motor oil, a scent that now somehow felt intimate, tethered to memory and the present. For a long moment, They simply stood there, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. It was charged, a subtle electricity humming between them, fueled by years of unspoken emotions. He caught the way her gaze lingered on him, soft yet probing, as if she were searching for the boy he once was beneath the man he had become. I never forgot you," he said finally, voice low, almost hesitant. The words felt both terrifying and necessary. He watched her reaction, noticing the way her breath caught, her shoulders subtly stiffening, and then relaxing again as she processed the confession. Her lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. "I wondered, sometimes," she admitted, her voice gentle, carrying years of unvoiced longing. "I wondered what would have happened if things had been different." She stepped a fraction closer, the warmth of her presence brushing against him. He felt it like sunlight spilling over chilled skin. They both hesitated, caught between the familiarity of old affection and the caution of adulthood. His hands twitched slightly, uncertain where to rest, until instinctively, he reached out and brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. Her eyes softened at the gesture, and for a heartbeat, time seemed suspended. "I never thought I'd see you again like this," he murmured, the vulnerability in his voice belying the calm he usually carried. She laughed softly, a sound that carried both nostalgia and the weight of years apart. "Me neither," she admitted, her fingers brushing briefly against his arm as she spoke, a fleeting touch that felt both daring and tender. They were close now, standing on the threshold between the past and the possibility of something new. Each subtle gesture, the tilt of her head, the brief contact of hands, the warmth radiating from her presence, was electric, yet measured, careful. No words were needed to convey the mutual recognition of desire and caution entwined. He glanced toward the quiet street, aware of the child waiting in the car, but when he looked back at her, the world narrowed to the curve of her smile, the depth of her eyes, the shared history hanging palpably in the air. His heart hammered, a mix of anticipation and fear, but beneath it all, a deep sense of rightness. Finally, she exhaled, a soft, deliberate breath that seemed to release the tension between them. "We have a lot to talk about," she said quietly, eyes never leaving his. He nodded, feeling the warmth of her hand settle lightly against his arm, grounding him. "Yeah," he replied, "a lot to talk about, and maybe a chance to get it right this time." And in that moment, amid the fading sunlight and the soft hum of the city, the past collided beautifully with the present. A long-buried connection had surfaced, and the slow burn of years apart ignited a new possibility, an unspoken promise that neither was ready to walk away from. Over the next few days, her visits became less about the car and more about sharing ordinary moments together. Each encounter unfolded gently, like a river slowly carving its path, their connection deepening without the need for grand gestures. She helped with errands, sometimes joining him at the park or stopping by the local grocery store. Each moment felt grounded and real, bridging the gap between past familiarity and present intimacy. One afternoon, they sat on a worn wooden bench in the park, the late sun spilling golden light across the playground. His child was nearby, laughing as they ran after a frisbee, their energy infectious. He and she exchanged a glance, a quiet acknowledgement of the life they were stepping into together. She reached over, letting her fingers brush his as she passed him a water bottle. The contact was brief, but it lingered, warmth radiating through his palm, a silent promise of closeness. Later, in the kitchen of his modest home, they worked side by side preparing dinner. The scent of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air, mingling with her perfume, creating a cocoon of familiarity and comfort. He watched the way her hands moved, graceful, precise, yet relaxed, while chopping vegetables, and he felt a soft ache in his chest. The subtle rhythm of shared domesticity, the ease of casual touches as they passed utensils or brushed shoulders, wrapped them in a quiet intimacy that was both tender and grounding. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences. She asked about his child's favorite bedtime stories, his routines, his dreams for the future. He listened as she spoke of her own aspirations, her fears behind the polished exterior, the moments when leadership felt isolating. Each revelation built trust, a tapestry of understanding woven from both vulnerability and respect. One evening, as the day faded into twilight, she sat close on the couch while reading aloud a story to his child. Her arm brushed against his, accidental yet deliberate, and he felt a spark of warmth, a steady, quiet pulse of connection. Their eyes met across the room, and in that glance was the unspoken acknowledgement. They were no longer two separate worlds, but threads beginning to intertwine. Even in ordinary gestures, pouring a glass of water, helping a backpack into place, adjusting a sleeve, they discovered intimacy. The subtle touches, the casual laughter, the shared glances, all carried the weight of years past and the tenderness of the present. For the first time in a long while, he felt the possibility of a shared life, not just as a caretaker and an old friend, but as partners exploring the slow bloom of a new chapter together. By the end of the week, there was a sense of rhythm, a quiet harmony in their interactions. The child sensed it too, comfortable and happy with the presence of someone who could nurture both fun and stability. And for him, the steady warmth of her presence, the ease of connection, and the soft, fleeting touches, hands brushing, shoulders touching, smiles lingering, confirmed that this wasn't just a rekindled memory. It was something real, slow-burning, and ready to grow. The early evening air was crisp but comforting as he walked along the sidewalk with her and his child, the fading sunlight painting everything in a soft golden glow. The city had quieted, and the streets seemed to hold their own gentle rhythm, mirroring the slow, steady pulse of emotions that had been building between them. Their hands brushed occasionally, lingering just long enough to spark warmth, a silent acknowledgement of the connection they had nurtured over days and weeks. At the small park near his home, they stopped. His child ran ahead, laughing, and he watched her kneel to offer a gentle hug. He could see the tenderness in her movements, the way her arms curved protectively around the child, her cheek resting lightly against theirs. It was natural, unforced, a quiet demonstration of her patience, care, and the bond forming between them all. The sight tugged at his heart, filling him with a sense of rightness he hadn't expected to feel again. He approached her, and she looked up, their eyes meeting in a moment heavy with unspoken words. He could see the mixture of confidence and vulnerability in her gaze, the woman who had once been his first love, and the one he had grown to admire anew. He stepped closer, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the evening air, and his hand brushed lightly against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let it linger, her fingers entwining briefly with his, a simple yet profound gesture. I never imagined it would feel this, right? He admitted softly, voice low enough that only she could hear. She smiled, her lips curving in that familiar way that had always made his chest tighten. Neither did I, she replied, her thumb brushing the back of his hand. But maybe it was always meant to be, just at the right time. For a long moment, they stood there, letting the warmth of their presence speak for what words could not. There were no dramatic confessions, no grand gestures, just a quiet, steady intimacy built from shared history, vulnerability, and slow-burning desire. His child came running back, wrapping arms around both of them, their laughter bridging the past and present. The simplicity of the moment, hand touches, lingering glances, the steady rhythm of three hearts connecting, felt more powerful than any declaration. Finally, he drew her close, and she leaned against him, her cheek resting lightly against his chest. He could feel the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat, matching his own in a rhythm that was both comforting and exhilarating. She tilted her head slightly, letting their foreheads nearly touch, and in that closeness, they shared everything words could never capture. The years of longing, the hesitation, and now the trust and hope that had grown between them. As the sky deepened to twilight, they walked home together, fingers intertwined, hearts aligned. The child skipped ahead, glancing back to see the small family forming in front of them, content and secure. And in the quiet glow of the evening, they all moved forward together, past love rekindled and transformed into a new chapter full of warmth, trust, and a love that had been years in the making but was now beautifully present. If you enjoyed this slow-burn love story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more heartwarming tales of unexpected romance. And comment below, what would you do if your first love showed up again years later?